is power, Sir Francis Bacon. Education's purpose is to replace an empty mind with an open one, Malcolm Forbes. The great aim of education is not knowledge, but action, Herbert Spencer. I've never let my schooling interfere with my education, Mark Twain. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance, Andy McIntyre. Teaching and learning. These are some of the fundamental aspects of our society. We all need to learn, and to do that, we all need to be taught. Well, this is true within the church today as well. And one of the great spiritual gifts that's given is the gift of teaching. Teaching is the ability to communicate God's truth in ways that people understand so that the truth can change their lives. Teaching can be formal or informal, spoken or unspoken, but the goal of teaching isn't just information, it's transformation. Paul had established himself as a learned man, as a teacher. He was a rising star in Judaism and was able to live a life of self-reliance. His wisdom and understanding and knowledge were unmatched. As we discovered in the previous chapter of the story, Paul's life was radically changed when he met Jesus on the Damascus Road. He began to teach others about Jesus, but actually was sent away because his life was threatened. We now fast forward about 10 years, and we find Paul and Barnabas in Acts chapter 13 being set apart for the special work that God had called them to. Their task was to take the message of Jesus to the whole world. And even though they were called in a special way to do this, we have to remember that each of us have been called to take the good news of the gospel to the whole world. As they set out, their message was responded to both positively and negatively. It was both accepted and rejected. In general, the common people heard the message about Jesus as Messiah and responded with great enthusiasm. Also, in general, the religious leaders heard the message about Jesus and responded very negatively, even with anger. This would be the pattern that would be repeated over and over again from city to city to city throughout all of Asia Minor. To show the extreme reactions to this message, consider the story we find in Acts chapter 14. Paul heals a man in the city of Lystra, and the people respond to them thinking that he and Barnabas are the gods, Hermes and Zeus. They were so excited they actually wanted to prepare a sacrifice to offer to them. Paul had to intervene to set the record straight. As this scene continues, some Jews from the city that Paul had previously been in come and turn the people against him. These people who once thought Paul and Barnabas were gods now took them, stoned them, took them out of the city, and left them for dead. Another scene with contrasting responses is found in Acts chapter 16. Here, Paul is in the city of Philippi, and at a prayer meeting, he meets a worshiper of God called Lydia, who responds positively to the message of Jesus Christ. At some point in the future, as Paul is on his way to another prayer meeting, he casts the demon out of a servant girl. Now, this demon allowed this girl to somehow predict the future, and so she was a great source of income for her owners. Well, with the demon gone, this girl was not able to do this any longer, and it didn't sit too well with her owners. Her owners brought Paul and Barnabas before the city officials, and they stirred up the crowd against them. This story continues with the miraculous release from prison of Paul and Barnabas and the salvation of the jailer and his family. What happens when doing what is right results in problems? What happens when serving God is a struggle? Paul dealt with obstacles and difficulties on a regular basis, but he was doing what God wanted him to do. That's why God spoke these words of peace to Paul. So far, we've looked at Paul's life through the historical book of Acts. Luke's writings show Paul's life and follow him as he's traveled from city to city telling the world about Jesus. Some of these cities may actually sound familiar to you. For example, Corinth, Ephesus, and Philippi. If these cities sound familiar, it's probably because you're familiar with the books of the Bible by those names. 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Ephesians, Philippians. Paul wrote real letters to real people to address real situations. In fact, the next time you read one of those books, imagine you're in that city hearing Paul's words for the very first time. Paul wrote 1 Corinthians to deal with some problems in the church that he had started some years earlier. Some of those problems included divisions in the church and issues of immorality. He also addressed questions that dealt with marriage and food, worship, and the resurrection. Paul would then, years later, write a letter called 2 Corinthians that was expressing gratefulness that some of these issues had been resolved. It's also in 2 Corinthians that we find the longest instruction about giving in the entire Bible. Ephesians was sent to the people of Ephesus, a city where Paul had spent about 3 years. Ephesus was a major city and was the hub of politics, commerce, and even religion. It would be from Ephesus that the gospel message would spread throughout all of Asia Minor. The letter to the Ephesians deals with our status with God in that relationship, how we are found to be in Christ. It deals with the reality of God's grace resulting in our salvation. And Paul also talks about the spiritual gifts given to the church. In addition, Paul deals with marriage and family and even how to battle against the enemy. Philippians was written as a thank you letter to the church in Philippi. Paul was expressing his gratefulness to the people for their continuing support of his ministry. Amazingly enough, Philippians is one of 4 letters that were written while Paul was in jail. But as you read the letter, you certainly don't detect that he's in any kind of a difficult situation. Perhaps the greatest thing that Paul writes about is the issue of humility as demonstrated by Jesus Christ. That is expressed as the model in the way we should live our lives. As the author of nearly half the letters of the New Testament, God certainly used Paul to make an impact on our faith. Paul was a great teacher, and he challenged and encouraged and instructed us in the way of Christ. But Paul knew that the role of teacher couldn't end with him. God would need others to continue to share, to continue to teach the message of Christ. Remember, the purpose of teaching isn't just to inform, it's to transform. The reason you're involved in the story isn't just so you can know some more things about God. We don't need just more knowledgeable followers of Christ. We need more obedient followers of Christ.